Barely Research Facts is a fact-based podcast brought to you by Art Now Thus, an experiential arts agency based out of Mumbai. Each week, we pick a word at random, dive into it and see where it brings us. We are your hosts. My name is Ragini and this is Shar. Hi and welcome back to yet another episode of Barely Research Facts.
Hello. What's our word for this episode?
Our word is memory.
I really liked it.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting. Lots to dig into. Lots of stuff that I wouldn't touch with a barge pole because it seems too scientific for me to be...
Same.
Yeah, for me to be the person to convey the information, you know. So I've chosen some interesting facts, not necessarily too scientific.
Same. I have no scientific facts.
Cool.
Good call, I think.
Yeah, I think we've laid the premise for this episode. Nothing sciencey.
Now we can dive right in.
So I wanted to start with an interesting phenomenon that I noticed. The first thing that I thought of when I thought of memory was how bad my memory is and how I could essentially make myself feel bad and see how other people are better than me.
That's always a good road to go down.
Yeah, and I think it's
Very
the
healthy.
purpose of the internet. So I was looking through the records related to memory. You'd think, okay, so most objects remembered. That's it. So-and-so has remembered the most objects and his name is in forever set in stone. But no, these records get broken almost every year and the subsections are insane. Let me give you a couple of examples.
Okay.
The longest number sequence memorized in 1 minute, binary. The record is held by Arvind Pashupati from Coimbatore in India.
Oh, well done.
The number that he remembered was 270 in sequence.
I guess you could just put a rhythm to that, right? You just have a rhythm and you just be like, I think that, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Like if I had to just do 010101, I'd just find a rhythm to it and I'd just be like, okay, this could be done.
Okay.
I think that'd be a musical memory device.
We can test whether you could do 270, Ragini. The most numbers memorized in 1 minute, non-binary. So that record is held by Sanchit Sharma from Delhi in India.
Wow, we're really doing well here, huh?
And he remembered 120 numbers. And that was on the 11th of November 2020. So he spent his COVID-19 year well.
Remembering 120 numbers in sequence.
Then we've got the longest sequence of objects memorized in 1 minute. And that's held by Nabal Pajiar from Hyderabad in India.
Wow.
Yep, again.
Okay, I'm actually impressed with how many Indians are in this.
So this is the peculiarity, right? It's insane the amount of Indians who are record holders or have been record holders. And then the last one that I wanted to highlight was the longest color sequence memorized. And that's held
Is this also by an Indian?
by Subhash Mowgli from Hyderabad in India. And he remembered 170.
Okay, wow, that is impressive.
Yeah, and he works in the field of memory practice in education, teaching students memorization techniques as well as regularly demonstrating his memorization abilities. That's insane to me. Also, I'm not surprised now that I think about it because when I was growing up, the main method of studying was just by rote.
Rote and mugging.
Yeah, by mugging. Just repeat it to yourself enough times and maybe you'll say it in your sleep.
And hopefully put it on the exam paper. If you're lucky.
But, they do have techniques. For instance, this color memorization record that is held, I was looking up just the table that you would use and color generator link. I'll put it up on our blog post and you guys can have a go as well. But there was an interesting comment in my my deep delving into the subject that said you could convert each color to a number. So in actuality, the record could be for memorizing how many ever numbers, as long as you assign a number to each color. So Mr. Subhash Mowgli could also break the record for longest number sequence memorized, if that's the technique he used.
We should tell him. Hope he's listening to this podcast.
Yeah, I mean...
We have a lot of faith.
But it is techniques, that's the thing. It's not just inherent ability to remember. It's just using correct techniques. And coming to techniques, I was watching this video by this guy called Dave Farrow. He's a Guinness record holder himself. But he played an interesting game with the audience that he was speaking to. He pulled a list of words that he had used in a double-blind neuro study at Yale University to memorize. Okay, just this list, just normal words: cat, watermelon, lake, bunny, cat soup, water tower, and so on and so forth. And by the end of this, that audience had remembered the entire list of 16 words in sequence because he told them how to do it. He provided them with visual aids. So he had a picture of a cat pushing a watermelon into a lake and then so and so. So he created association.
Wow.
Yeah, and by the end of it, they remembered the whole list.
Okay, that is impressive.
Yeah, we need
for
to try
a
this.
large audience to remember a bunch of random words together.
Yeah.
I think I might be that one person in the audience who'd be like, huh? Shit, sorry.
Get the first two words and then they just like sort of mumble along like, yep, what bunny? Catsup.
Yeah, it's like how you sing along to songs you don't know.
Yeah. So he said that when your memory works, it works in a natural way, just like when you look up to remember things. So did you know this is a thing? Did you notice that this was a thing? That your eyes move in a certain direction when you're doing a certain thing? When you're trying to remember something, your eyes might drift to the top and left or right.
Wow, okay, I'm noticing it right now.
Yeah, because you're thinking about
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm trying to remember and I'm trying to see where my eyes go. But yeah.
I can't confirm the veracity of this claim. Some people claim that it is true, and I have heard it on crime documentaries and things like that. The reason that you do that is because the optic nerve, which is behind your eyeballs basically, by doing that, you're directing more energy towards particular parts of your brain that help with remembering.
Oh, okay.
So it could be that. And then, just a little list of things that your eyes do when you're doing certain things, when you're supposedly, when you're remembering something you saw, your eyes will move upwards and to the left. When you're recalling something you heard, you look to either side and tilt the head as if listening. When you're recalling a feeling or emotion, you look down and to the right, I suppose because it's like a moment of vulnerability. And when you're mentally talking to yourself, you look down and to the left.
I actually did all of this as you were saying it, and I feel like I do all of it.
I mean, it could be just the power of suggestion. I could have hypnotized you.
Yeah, also. It's like, yeah, of course, correct.
And on a completely unrelated note, Ragini, did you know that the term Canadiana is used to describe things like books, historical documents, artifacts, ideas, activities that concern or are distinctive of Canada, its people, and its culture?
Oh, that's a nice word.
Yeah.
But okay.
That has nothing to do with memory. I'm sorry. I think Dave Farrow is Canadian and he mentioned it in his talk and it just stuck in my head. So there's a couple of the best memory records.
One random fact list, which has nothing to do with memory. So I did a record as well, but I did something more my speed. I looked up the worst memory in the world.
Oh, and what did it throw back at you?
So, worst memory in the world, actually, hands down, is this musician. His name is Clive Baring, and it's actually a little tragic, but he basically is somebody who suffers from chronic anterograde and retrograde amnesia, which basically means that he has no memory of his past life until whatever point he lost his memory, and he cannot create new memories. So, he literally has a 30-second memory. And now the phenomena is also called 30-second Clive because all of his memories last 30 seconds like he starts afresh again.
It's like 50 First Dates, but worse.
Yeah. I mean, he often it takes him a while to even realize that he's woken up because he constantly keeps feeling like he's just come out of some kind of comatose state because he can't remember anything. There was an interview conducted and they did ask him, do you miss anything about your previous life? And he said, honestly, I don't remember most of it. So the good thing is that he says he's never bored. Because everything is new.
Bless him. Yeah, I love.
So that's glass half full.
I just love that attitude. I mean, he can only remember 30 seconds and then his memory resets.
Yeah. But surprisingly, he remembers he was a musician and he remembers being in love with his wife. He can't remember getting married to her. Yeah, but this basically took me down this. I went down, I was also then looking up other cool cases of amnesia. And just really interesting stories that people have gone through.
Yeah.
There was this gentleman called Michael Boatwright who basically woke up one morning. He was a 61-year-old war veteran, American, all right? And in 2013, he woke up unconscious at this random hotel in Florida. And when the authorities reached out, they found his ID, but he just couldn't communicate with them. And that was because he had woken up believing he could only speak Swedish. He was a Swedish man named Johan Ick. And that was his identity. And he was just completely unconvinced that he was actually Michael Boatwright. And eventually they came to realize that it's a form of amnesia, and it was a trauma-induced form of amnesia.
Oh, like dissociative amnesia.
Yeah, and he was basically, I think he was going through a rough time on the work front. He wasn't getting a job, and he'd been rejected for a job opportunity, and he, I think the trauma and the stress kind of caused him to just forget who he was.
Sad, yeah.
And wake up with an alter ego altogether. And then, speaking of 51st dates, there is actually some 51st dates, but it's more 13 going on 30. There's this British lady called Naomi Jacobs who woke up one morning in 2008 as a 32-year-old mother, and woke up one morning and just looked across and just couldn't remember her life. And she refused to believe that this 15-year-old boy claiming to be her son was actually her son. She was in a complete state of panic because the last memory she had was going to bed in her room next to her sister when she was 15. And she couldn't remember anything of her life. So she just woke up and she was like, where am I? Who are these people?
But is she okay? Did she get her memory back?
Yeah. She got her memory back a couple of months later. And
Months? Oh my God. Can you imagine those months for that family?
Your mother refusing to acknowledge that you're her son.
Yeah, I mean, that's... Yeah.
It would be sad. Yeah, I'm laughing, but it's sad.
I swear, guys, Ragini is extremely empathetic.
Yeah. It does sound like a rom-com plot.
It does. It sounds something like out of a horror film. Like Memento, but I don't know. A thriller, at least. At least a thriller.
Clearly a very different perspectives on this. But also, speaking of bad memory, you know what I did realize? So there's apparently a bunch of studies, obviously, that's been done on why we forget. And forgetfulness is quite key to how the mind functions, because it allows for us to actually remembering everything would be really exhausting. And I know we are coming to that in the later on in the episode. But for normal day-to-day functioning, forgetting it's imperative to our normal functioning. And so one of the ways the mind does this is the act of walking through a doorway. If you're trying to remember something, if you're trying to remember a party or whatever, and you're walking through a room and you cross a doorway, it's very likely that you'll sometimes struggle to remember what happened before you crossed through that doorway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's because your brain is kind of creating timelines to say, okay, now that's unimportant and it's gone and it's in the past, and now you're moving into the next thing. It also sort of ties in with how we perceive time, because the closer in time that we've experienced a moment in a memory, the more clear it is, and the farther away it is in time is how, it sort of gets more, it gets far more fuzzy. And so the brain creates these mental timelines for us, so it allows us to sort of classify our memories accordingly, and that also has a role to play in how we as human beings perceive time in this sort of linear format.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So do you know sex can cause memories to be erased?
Erased?
Yeah, it can create a sort of temporary, so even you don't have to be someone suffering from a condition of amnesia, but there's certain activities, of which sex is one, that can sort of create slight brain fog, and it's called transient global amnesia.
That was called orgasming.
We're also apparently programmed to forget infancy. There's a reason why most of us don't remember anything about our lives before we were 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. But that's because the brain is developing so fast when we're younger, and there's so many new things that we're sort of picking up, that the body and the brain is programmed to just forget most of what you've learned in infancy, and
Also, it's probably to protect you from trauma, because adults do pretty much anything in front of babies because they're like, oh, babies are just that's a baby. So it's probably Dr. Shar with an MD with a PhD in evolutionary biology. That's what I think it is. And child psychology. I've been busy. Talking about being busy in this life, do you believe in past lives? I definitely don't.
Okay, good. Thank God.
No, but you know what? It's so interesting to me that I don't know if it's mass psychosis or whatever it is, but there are so many people, and people in the scientific community as well, who have done research, studies, compiled anecdotal information or personal experiences through interviews of just people who claim they have recovered memories from a past life. And this is all ages, kids, adults, people with or without any kind of trauma.
But how do you verify this? I can say anything, right? And there's just no way you can verify it.
I mean, there are cases where people have said that, oh, I was, a child or something would say I was a doctor in the US in the 60s. And there are ways to go back and check.
Yeah. And
what was your grandmom's name? Where did you live? But I don't think that things have been proven without doubt. So let me just go back to past life regression. Okay. This is the technique that people or practitioners use to recover what they believe are memories of past lives or incarnations. And it's a form of hypnosis. And it's widely discredited, let me just add that here, and unscientific.
Okay.
And it's declared so by medical practitioners. And they generally, experts say that recovered memories are usually fantasies or delusions of a type of like confabulation. Basically, people collect
Okay.
information, or your brain is latently collecting information as you go through life, right? You don't necessarily consciously pick up on everything your brain is absorbing. So it's a method of basically just like making up stuff, not to insult anybody who believes they have had.
Previous life.
So, and also it's the power of suggestion, like I mentioned earlier, it's so strong. Belief is such a strong thing, and it's typically past life regression is undertaken either in pursuit of a spiritual experience or in a psychotherapeutic setting. So, most of the people who go into it already believe in reincarnation or are open to the idea of reincarnation or rebirth and things like that. And so they're more likely to have these experiences. Basically, the subject will answer a series of questions while hypnotized, and this will reveal identity, events, or whatever of alleged past life. And it's sort of like a sub technique of recovered memory therapy, which is an actual therapy which practitioners use with victims of trauma. But with these settings, usually the questions that they ask are very suggestive. So instead of saying, "Do you remember anything?" they'd say, "What do you remember?" or "Do you remember anything about this particular thing?" So it's very suggestive. And the source of these memories are considered to be cryptomnesia. Cryptomnesia is an extremely interesting phenomenon. It's just essentially using information that your brain has absorbed during as you go about your life, incorporating it into this fantasy or this illusion that you create, and believing without doubt that it is a memory.
Oh.
And it can happen in many things, like in anything creative. For example, when an investigator develops a research idea that he or she believes is original, whereas in actuality, it can be documented that he or she saw or heard the idea at some earlier point in time. So it's also related to inadvertent plagiarism. So you read a book or you read an excerpt from a book, and then 10 years later, you write your own book that has such a similar premise to that original manuscript that it's inadvertent plagiarism, not necessarily purposeful. I saw an interesting aside where there's a letter that Mark Twain wrote to Helen Keller, because I didn't know this, but Helen Keller was accused of plagiarism at some point in her career. She was acquitted and things like that. But he wrote her a letter, and some of the things he said really were interesting. He said, "When a great orator makes a great speech, you're listening to 10 centuries and 10,000 men, but we call it his speech. And really, some exceedingly small portion of it is his, but not enough to signify.
Wow.
It is merely a Waterloo. It is Wellington's battle in some degree, and we call it his, but there are others that contributed." So it is true,
Nice.
when someone puts something down on paper, it's not necessarily all them. It's just that they phrased it the best.
Right. And also, I think this is why when you're lying, one of the things that they will tell you to do is, you keep your story as close to the truth as possible. So therefore, you have to remember very few facts. It also allows you to associate your facts with real memories that have occurred in your life. So that's why spies essentially are, when they take on a personality, they're basically asked to completely rip off any semblance of their own life, right from their clothes. If you have a wife, you're not even allowed to contact the person. You just have to completely forget that you led that life, and you have to live your life as your new person, because you just have to believe it that strongly, so that that's the only memory that stays.
So in the course of my research, I came across this study that is still active. It's been active for the last 50 years at the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. They've published articles and books and all sorts. They've documented over 2,500 cases, all coded, entered into a database, and they're just memories. They're people who came forward saying that they had memories from a past life.
Wow.
I mean, I could talk about this forever, but we should probably move on. We will put a lot of the the links and the stuff that we've talked about in the blog post, so don't forget to check that out. Shall we talk about eidetic and photographic memory, Ragini?
Yes, I have this as well.
So do you want to talk about how eidetic memory works?
So I was actually under the impression that eidetic memories was pretty much just being able to have a photographic memory, across the course of your life. And while I was researching this, I realized that actually, no, eidetic memories and photographic memories are two different things. And all of us are capable of having eidetic memories. In fact, all of us have eidetic memories. What we don't have is the ability to turn everything into a photographic memory. So our eidetic memory is our first level, the minute a stimulus hits us and the brain registers it, it keeps it for like 2-3 seconds. And then for most of us, a lot of our memories will just disappear there. But for people with a photographic memory, the brain will store it in its short-term memory. And so they're able to recall it for a much longer period of time. And that's the difference. So basically, if you have a photographic memory, you have far more long-term recollection of daily events and occurrences and anything that you see and read and hear than people with a regular memory.
So it's like step 1, step 2, step 3, basically. As soon as you see something, that flash of an image, that's your eidetic memory at work. And then it goes into short term, or it could be discarded. And then if it goes from short term to long term, you remember it. But if it doesn't, it goes after a couple of hours, days, weeks, months, whatever. When I was reading about photographic memory, I did see that there's quite a bit of debate in whether it exists at all in medical and psychology circles. Some researchers believe that it's not possible. They argue that people who remember things clearly for a long period are using the more normal memory enhancements of like association or chunking, which is similar to what Dave Farrow used with his audience. And they don't believe that people can see an image of whatever it is they're remembering in their mind's eye so long after the event. And it's because it is difficult to prove. That's the problem. You're going on the say-so of the person who is remembering it. Whether they naturally assign memory techniques to every single thing they go see and, experience on a daily basis you never know. But enough people have come forward that it's worth the consideration that it is a thing, if it makes sense. Now, I was in relation to eidetic memory and photographic memory. I read about this thing called hyperthymesia, it's also called piking or hyperthymestic syndrome. This is proven. It's a condition in which an individual possesses a superior autobiographical memory. It means that he or she can recall the vast majority of their personal experiences in their life and events in their life. How insane is that?
Wow.
Yes, and it's, you know how you say you have like Superman and then you've got kryptonite? Direct opposites. Yeah, this is the opposite to me.
Yeah. Oh my God, you can't forget anything. That's awful.
I mean, it's awful, but also awesome. Like if you lead a charmed life, I guess it's awesome. But if you don't.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do also over here is to draw the distinction between hyperthymesia and those with other forms of exceptional memory. With hyperthymesia, you don't use a mnemonic or a technique or any kind of memory, remembering technique. You just remember. And also, hyperthymestic people, they tend to remember things that are personal, autobiographical accounts of significant and mundane events in their life. So you'll remember that cup of coffee that was, average, not great, not bad, but average.
Poor guys, dude.
Yeah, you'll also remember that time you went to the Grand Canyon. So nobody's been able to explain exactly biologically how this phenomenon or syndrome occurs. They have conducted some kind of research into it, and some of the findings were that everyone in this particular study, they had variations in 9 structures of their brains compared to those of the control subjects, which is people who were just like me or you. And they had more robust white matter linking the middle and frontal parts. And most of the differences were in areas known to be linked to autobiographical memory. So it is something structurally different in the brains of these people that enables them to remember, that makes them have this syndrome. What was interesting was that people with this kind of autobiographical memory did not necessarily score higher on routine lab memory tests or like when asked to use rote memory aids. So maybe they wouldn't have been able to remember that list of 16 words. But they did remember that time when they were 5.5 years old that their mum dropped them. Yeah. So that's hyperthymesia. I did also, just to end the podcast, we could talk about the collective unconscious.
Oh, Freud and Jung.
Yes, Jung.
Yeah.
So Carl Jung was he was a psychologist, and he was of the school of analytical psychology. I studied him briefly in college. I can't claim to be an expert. But he worked with Sigmund Freud, but was a prominent psychologist in his own right. Sort of affirmed a lot of what Freud said at the beginning, but as time went on, as most friendships do, it crumbled. No, I'm joking. But they did split their principles and their, ideologies. So I was interested by Jung's theory of the collective unconscious. According to him, it's made up of a collection of knowledge and imagery that every person is born with and is shared by all human beings from an ancestral experience.
Oh, okay. There is a basis for this in philosophy.
Okay.
And it is one of the Greek philosophers. And I want to say it's Plato, but I'm not 100% sure.
Ragini, you're impressing me.
I really am putting the barely researched. But there is this idea of just...
that you inherit memories genetically.
Just let's leave it at that. We'll put this in the blog post later.
So what he said was that though humans may not know what thoughts and images are in their collective unconscious, it is thought that in moments of crisis, the psyche can tap into the collective unconscious, which, goes into this thing of the collective unconscious being like an iceberg. What they usually say the subconscious is like, it's what you can't see that is important.
Yeah.
But he believed that this collective unconscious was expressed through universal concepts like, signs, symbols, patterns of thinking, behaving, things like that. So, which is interesting. It's what we would say is instinctual. Like, yeah. But I obviously I have no comment on whether it's true or not, or I don't know. Yeah, it just seemed interesting.
How well it held through. Speaking of icebergs, though, in the blog post, we are going to put up this link. There's a very cool, it's just a fun game that you can play with drawing icebergs. And we'll put the link up and you can...
Doodle an iceberg.
Have a fun afternoon for about 5 minutes. Okay, so at the end of this, I think, honorary postdoctorates, Ragini and Shar, sign off. We will see you next time. Bye.
That's it for today. The episode you just heard was edited by Mohit Chandelier. Music for the episode is by Charita Arora. If you liked the episode, if you'd like to talk to us about the episode, or if you have a word you'd like us to research, drop us a message. We'd love to hear from you. We're on Instagram as Barely Researched Facts, or you could visit our website www.artnowthus.in. We'll see you next time.